Hi, Jennifer Witt here with the Witt Law Group. If you're interested in Senate Bill 5002 that's being presented right now or discussed right now for Washington's new DUI standard, stay tuned. This video is for you. So thanks for tuning in. This is about Washington's new proposed law to change the standard for a DUI from 0.08 to 0.05. And granted, this is just proposed, it hasn't gone into effect, but one of the arguments that is being discussed is they're looking at the state of Utah, because Utah is the only state in the country to have this standard, to have that 0.05 standard. And I think it's interesting because I actually have a place in Utah. We have a place in Utah. I've spent a lot of years in Utah. My oldest son is at the University of Utah. So I kind of wanted to weigh in on this because I think it's interesting anytime when you oversimplify, hey, look what they've done, this is how we can accomplish this goal. But I think it's particularly interesting because if you don't understand the culture in Utah or don't know much about the state, Utah has a very high Mormon population. Now they prefer LDS, the LDS church. So the LDS population in Utah, I believe, is about 65%. In the Salt Lake County, down where Salt Lake City is, it's actually much lower. I just read that it's actually below 50%. And up near Park City, which many people have heard of, the resort town, much lower. So that's kind of where the heathens hang out. And we, those of us who do drink alcohol, that's kind of where you have your drinks and go out and the restaurants. Not to say that Utah doesn't have many wonderful, beautiful places to go visit and you can consume alcohol, but those are kind of your party crowds, right? So you're talking 65% roughly of the state of Utah. The LDS Church does not believe in consuming alcohol, that's a tenet that they believe in, and most stick to that. So you have a much smaller portion of the population that would consume alcohol that this would even apply to. They have about half the arrests we do for DUI, and not to mention they're looking at the state of Utah over the last couple of years. So you also have that weird pandemic year, right? So we've got some weird data in there as well. But I think it's really important to look at culture and what Washington is attempting to extrapolate from Utah data to use to their benefit. It's really not the same. As I will go into more on this video, Utah has just a lot of differences in terms of where you go out and how you go out and your access. When I'm in Park City, I don't even have to pay for an Uber. I mean, it's just free transit. A minivan shows up, and I can just jump in and it takes me anywhere I want to go for free. So just very, very different, and it's consolidated. So you have, Salt Lake City is very easy to get around. I mean, you could really in the summer just walk to most places, but light rail and transit and all of that I'll kind of go into, but the culture is so different. So I think it's really interesting, those of you who know the two states, or if you don't, look into it, because the differences are really significant. As I'm listening to this and having spent so much time in both states, I find it just fascinating that they're borrowing this data. Great intention, but I mean, you could not pick two states more polar opposite in terms of use of alcohol, drugs, and culture of the population, political affiliation, all of that. So pretty interesting, and I can elaborate on that more. So as I was mentioning about the differences, and when you're comparing them, I think you also have to look at the fact that in the state of Utah, and I'm not licensed in Utah, Ryan is, but you can look and read about the statutes, read the DUI statute in Utah, read in Washington. Many people don't realize in Washington, you basically could be arrested for a 0.05 already. And there is no limitation on that. Many people don't realize that or come from out of state, but we have a second prong affected by. You could be arrested for an 03. I mean, there's no limit what law enforcement wants to do. If they believe you are impaired or affected by, the state can pursue a DUI charge simply based on that prong. There is no requirement that you blow or have a blood alcohol of 0.08. In Utah, that's different. They don't have the affected by prong. So realize, just if you're not comparing apples to apples is what I'm saying. It's great to say, hey, look at that. Utah got this result. Utah is a very different culture, very different access in terms of just not being reliant on vehicles. And that's because Salt Lake has such terrible air quality many months out of the year that they have made so many strides and efforts to get people to get out of their cars and commute and carpool and use free transit. It's just phenomenal what they've done in the last few years. So you can't ignore what else is happening. And some might say, well, who cares? Maybe this saves 5 lives. Let's just do it. The flip side, of course, is that no good deed goes unpunished. The truth is, when you change the law and you criminalize behavior that maybe doesn't need to be criminalized, you impact tens of thousands of people across the state of Washington in terms of where they're engaging in conduct that maybe should not be criminal. That having a glass of wine is not more distracting or impaired, I would argue, than having 2 tiny tots in the back screaming and hitting each other, or cranking your radio up so loud and being distracted and changing, I don't know, I guess I'm dating myself. Maybe it's not the radio, your Spotify. but anyway, whatever you're doing, there are so many ways to distract ourselves that we do not criminalize. You might get a ticket, an infraction, and raise your insurance rates, but you're not going to jail. You're not losing your security clearance. You're not losing your privilege to drive. You're not losing perhaps your livelihood. Maybe you have a CDL. There's so many ways in which, when you criminalize behavior that does not need to be criminalized, you really devastate certain communities. I feel very strongly this is going to negatively impact people of color and lower socioeconomic groups, because they're not living in Seattle. They're not living in wonderful high-rise communities over by Pioneer Square, or really popular areas where clubs or nice restaurants are. They're coming in with their cars. That's how we got around. I didn't have a wonderful apartment in the city over a cool club, and people commute. And you hope that the person, your designated driver, has nothing, but sometimes I'll have 1 beer, you guys can drink. Is 1 beer too impaired? And if that is so, if that's what we all agree, then we just have a 0 standard, like Japan. Just nobody drinks, or it's a DUI. But where you dance this line of, well, we might call you a DUI, we might not call you a DUI, an 04 might be one, you might be an 04, but you're going to fall under a different prong, or an 05, but you really weren't impaired. There is nothing wrong with your driving, but you do meet the standard because you had 1 glass of wine and didn't eat, or you just had that drink. So I think for me in this video, I want to convey that I hope we're all dialoguing about, yes, this is an honorable effort to try to reduce fatalities. Don't drink and drive. That's a clear answer, but it happens. In the meantime, when you're trying to save those lives, the hundreds that were lost last year, when you're trying to save those folks, are you inadvertently criminalizing behavior for tens or hundreds of thousands of people, between Utah and in Washington? Are you criminalizing behavior that doesn't need to be criminalized to reach that result? That is where I'm hoping people will be thinking about that. Does it matter? And it would leave you with this. In 2018 and in 2019, the state of Washington, there were approximately 29,000 DUI arrests, including physical control arrests. That then dropped 8,000. So it was down to about 21,000. Then it dropped to 19,000 in 2021. So we lost almost a third of the DUI arrests, and yet we had this blip in an increase in fatality. So if in fact DUI arrests increasing the odds that you will get a DUI, increasing the number of DUI arrests would somehow impact fatality. I mean, it didn't happen. We were theoretically arresting fewer people for DUI, and yet we were having fatalities at a higher rate. Not a huge rate, but an increase. So ask yourself, what else is happening? Just like how you cannot take the state of Utah and place that over the facts of the state of Washington. It's just, they're so different. And I really ask that anyone watching this video really think about that. Whenever you see statistics, particularly in crime, whenever it's used, be very careful of the source, of the standards used, of the sample size, of how those numbers are used for funding. Does the number being produced to you amount to a tax or a fee to the state, to a city? Is it being used to pay for something, incentivizing crime, essentially incentivizing finding someone guilty, leading to not resolving cases in a way that is more, I guess, focused on justice? Because I think we're ignoring the consequences of criminalizing Americans, criminalizing their behavior. And I would leave you with one last thought, because juveniles are just, that is near and dear to my heart, of how criminalizing conduct in the United States has so drastically negatively impacted a large portion of the population and how they think about themselves. It was a great effort as school shootings increased to bring in resource officers, as violence increased to bring in resource officers, and they did their job. And despite what we see in the news, they are making a difference in high schools. However, we have principals and teachers who are sending kids to a resource officer, to a police officer, rather than dealing with conduct themselves. And what has happened? Hundreds of thousands of kids who might have been expelled or gone to after-school detention now have a criminal charge. If that's what you want, you got it. But if that wasn't the intent, I think we really have to look at what we do in terms of criminalizing conduct to get a gain in one area. Really analyze what are the negative consequences that result from criminalizing conduct. I mean, obviously, I think you can tell from this video, I think there are far too many laws, too much that is so broad and sweeping, overbroad to the population, where conduct does not need to be labeled criminal, but it is, and it has very devastating consequences for many people in this country. So I just implore people, if you're watching this, reach out to your representatives, share your thoughts. Many of you will disagree with me. That's totally fine. That's our country. Debate and have a dialogue. I would just encourage anyone watching this to really contemplate, where are you trying to get, and what damage do you cause when you criminalize certain conduct or change laws? Like, is there a corresponding negative consequence to that? I would argue in this case, emphatically yes. Emphatically yes. There will be a greater negative consequence to more Washingtonians who are not impaired, but fall under a new per se standard. So anyway, you're all open to your opinions, and share those if you like. Try to be nice in the comments and respectful. That's what we always hope. But hopefully this brings about some thought and dialogue, and we shall see, because it looks like it's a hot topic right now and may go into effect. So we'll wait and see, and provide another video if we get more updates. Thanks for watching.